The drugs we have today can be wonderful. They can save our lives. We have these drugs because our parents and our parents' friends took risks in clinical trials to find out if these drugs worked and if they were safe. They took these risks on your behalf and on the behalf of their friends and the communities from which they came. They took these risks believing they were involved in science and that this was going to make the world a better and safer place for all of us. And it did. While the data from all the trials that they got involved in was publicly available. But it's not now available. If you get involved in a trial, your data that comes from risks that you take that make pharmaceutical companies profitable are then hidden. When you enter a trial, you think that the data that comes from the risks that you take are going to be available to experts to look at. These data aren't available. You have to decide whether you're going to cooperate with this system anymore, or whether, if you're being asked to take these risks, you should demand that the data from the clinical trials and other experiments that you get involved in should be available to everyone to make all of our lives better and safer.
Peter Rost is former head of the marketing department at Pfizer in the US, one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies. Here he tells how the market's demand for profits takes precedence over patient safety.
Läkemedelsindustrin är ju en affärsverksamhet där det gäller att tjäna pengar. Och det gäller inte bara att tjäna pengar utan att det gäller att tjäna mer pengar varje år. För det spelar ingen roll om man tjänar väldigt mycket pengar ett år och sen lika mycket nästa år. Det enda som spelar någon roll för aktiemarknaden är hur mycket mer pengar man tjänar år efter år. Och det här betyder att man fokuserar på någonting som man kallar för blockbusters, riktigt stora produkter.
Throughout the 1900s, Sweden worked to reduce corruption by increasing transparency and reducing inequality in society. Now it's back, and its perpetrators sneer at the Swedes who should have learned from the USA, according to Evelyn Pringle.
In this country, the pharmaceutical industry can contribute to politicians. In the last administration, in the Bush administration, when we became a joke around the world because said the Bush administration wants to screen the whole United States for mental illness. Yes, a new Freedom Commission was developed. And Teen Screen was in on that. They recommended that be put in the schools. Now we got a new administration. This is, 10 years later or whatever, 8 years of the Bush administration. Now we have the Obama administration. When Bush was in office, the Republicans were in office, 75% of the contributions from the pharmaceutical industry went to the Republicans. Now 75% go to the Democrats. We just passed our health care reform bill. The screening programs are in the health care reform bill. A program called the Mothers Act that's supposedly going to screen new mothers for postpartum depression. But here again, it is not just postpartum depression. It is a whole gamut of mental disorders, and they're going to screen them when they're pregnant, and they're going to put them on these psychiatric drugs. That is the name of the game. That got passed, buried in this couple thousand-page bill, healthcare reform bill. This is the Obama administration. They are now getting 75% of the contributions from the pharmaceutical industry. They are carrying on what the Bush administration put forth when they were getting 75% of the money from the pharmaceutical industry. It hasn't changed. The pharmaceutical industry has corrupted the government in the United States, and it doesn't matter if it's Democrats or Republicans. All you have to do is you can go online to the Center for Responsive Politics and it'll show you the money. Where it went when the Bush administration was there, where it goes now.
Barbara Mintzes is an associate professor and researcher at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. She knows through her recent research how society is being affected by the drug companies' advertising campaigns.
There are more and more diagnoses, psychiatric diagnoses, being covered in the DSM, the short for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's the manual put out by the American Psychiatric Association that lists all the criteria for psychiatric diagnoses. And it's very influential worldwide as well.
The Diagnostic Statistical Manual was intended as a tool for doctors, but became a goldmine for the pharmaceutical industry. Alan Francis, medical doctor and Professor Emeritus of Psychiatry, was president during preparation of the DSM-IV. Today he is skeptical.
Well, I think that it's very important for us to understand what are the appropriate boundaries for psychiatry. That when psychiatry stays within its appropriate boundaries, it's a wonderful profession and does a great deal of good. I have a fear that psychiatry is entering into a phase of excessive ambition and expansion of its boundaries at the expense of normality, with the likelihood of causing much more harm than good.
Definitionen på en blockbuster, det är en produkt som säljer för mer än $1 miljard om året. Det vill säga mer än 7-8 miljarder kronor om året. Så det här är jättestora produkter. Och för att de här produkterna ska kunna uppnå den här försäljningen så krävs det också väldigt stora resurser för att marknadsföra dem och för att sälja dem. Det betyder att man har alltså stora säljkårer med massa försäljare som åker ut till läkare och sjukhus och försöker stimulera försäljningen. Man använder reklambyråer, man använder PR-byråer, man använder alla möjliga andra sorters byråer, utbildningsbyråer kan man säga, som ibland till och med skriver artiklar som publiceras senare i vetenskapliga tidskrifter och som sätter ihop symposier och möten och andra saker för läkare. Allting är orkestrerat för att kunna sälja så mycket som möjligt.
Ray Moynihan from Australia is an award-winning journalist, writer and researcher, as well as filmmaker. He is co-author of the book and has also written the script for the movie of the same name, Selling Sickness.
One of the things I discovered that really shocked me was this article called The Art of Branding a Condition, and it was written by someone called Vince Parry, and it turns out he was an advertising expert who worked in Manhattan for drug companies, and his job was to do condition branding. And this was essentially, he talks very openly in the book and in the film about how he works with drug companies to help change perceptions about illness and disease. How he works with the drug companies and with doctors and the general community to try and change the way we think about illness, and to really sort of design the labels and design the names of conditions in a way that will help the interests of those selling drugs for those conditions. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is the nature of modern marketing.
One problem is that there's been an increase in diagnoses, and there are some diagnoses that, for instance, haven't even made it into the main text of the DSM. They're just in an appendix, and yet a medicine will be approved in the United States to treat that condition.
Psychiatry is revising its diagnostic system, and the work on DSM-V is headed in a direction that I think is somewhat reckless in its ambition, with the suggestion of a number of new proposals, new diagnoses, that have very little scientific foundation and potential for causing very unfortunate unintended consequences.
Premenstrual dysphoric disorder does have criteria that make it much more severe than premenstrual symptoms. Some women will have much more severe premenstrual symptoms. But should that be a psychiatric diagnosis? That's a whole question.
Alan Castles is one of Canada's most respected journalists. He co-authored the book Selling Sickness with Ray Moynihan, a book that's acclaimed by doctors worldwide.
Oftentimes the editor will get a press release. The press release will come from maybe a public relations firm that says, we've got this new drug, it's wonderful, it will treat this condition. They will pass it on to the journalist and say, do the story. Now, the really bad journalists will just recopy the press release, because in the press release are things like quotes from the company officials. Maybe they'll have a patient who said, "My life was wonderful and changed by this drug," and then they will reprint that as a news article. I tell journalists, that's not news, that's marketing. You're actually doing what the company wants you to do. Real news is doing what the company doesn't want you to do, which is to dig in and find out what are the real effects of this drug, what are the potential downsides, what are the costs and the harm involved in taking this treatment. And good journalists will ask those questions, lazy journalists won't. And at the end of the day, it is the good journalists that are providing a public good. And the public good meaning you're informing the public with balance, with both the evidence and the evidence of benefit and evidence of harm. So there's a lot of pressure in a newsroom, and some of that pressure comes from advertisers. And I see, for example, here in Canada, we have a magazine called Reader's Digest, very short, and it's full of drug ads. It's full of stories that are very positive and heartwarming about how people's lives have been changed. It is a marketing tool of the pharmaceutical industry, in my opinion, as are a lot of these so-called health magazines, that they scrape the surface of the disease, give you a little bit with a compelling story of a patient, and then talk about how people need to ask their doctor for these kinds of treatments. It's not journalism, it's marketing. And it goes under the camouflage of journalism.
Dee Mangan in Christchurch knows that many doctors find it hard to accept their vulnerability to the company's salesman. They quite simply need help.
Many physicians don't understand the kinds of ways that pharmaceutical companies will try to influence their decision making, to hold the pen in the prescription that they write. And they range from the ways that pharmaceutical representatives work to establish friendly relationships and perhaps persuade them to take pills or use pills that they might not otherwise have prescribed, but also through the kind of literature and education that's provided by pharmaceutical companies, which is really just disguised marketing. They pay important sounding key opinion leaders to come and give lectures which are very supportive of their medicines, perhaps not disclosing that they pay consultancy fees of many thousands of dollars to these experts who are coming to speak for them on behalf of the drug to give it credibility.
More and more academics realize the risks associated with current developments. Humanity's in danger of degenerating as a result of these medicines. Lehman McHenry is a lecturer in philosophy at California State University.
One of the things that I found most shocking was the fact that there were medical doctors who were willing to lend their names to these so-called scientific publications, where in fact what was happening were they were being used in competitive situations in the battles between pharmaceutical marketing departments. The other thing that I found quite shocking was that one can't really sort of come to trust the information that's being disseminated in the medical journals because of the problem with the literature being ghostwritten. Well, initially I just couldn't believe this. And so what happened was I started to investigate it for myself, and as I got deeper and deeper into the research involving the relationship between the journals and the pharmaceutical companies, I found that it was true that roughly 50%, if not more, of those clinical trials reports were constructed behind the scenes through what are called medical communication companies.
Ghostwriting, vad det innebär är egentligen att läkemedelsbolaget tar och anställer en reklambyrå kan man säga, som skriver ett manuskript baserat på studier som ska sedan publiceras i en sån här vetenskaplig tidskrift. De gör allt jobbet, och sen efter att jobbet är klart och det låter riktigt, riktigt bra för den här produkten som man ska sälja, så tar man och ringer upp olika forskare och vetenskapsmän och säger: skulle du vilja stå som författare till det här? Och det låter ju väldigt konstigt, men precis så här är det alltså. Då får alltså de så kallade författarna och vetenskapsmännen De får pengar, mycket pengar, för att bara skriva under sitt namn. Och de säger, om man pratar med dem, att ja, jag skulle ju kunna skriva det här för jag håller med om det som står och jag slapp göra jobbet. Men verkligheten är alltså att de fungerar precis som en person som säljer sitt namn på en reklampelare. Någon idrottsman som kanske säljer en chokladbit eller någonting sånt, precis på samma sätt. Och det här är ju väldigt missledande och vilseledande. Men det innebär också att även tidskrifter, vetenskapliga tidskrifter som har väldigt gott rykte får sådana här artiklar som kan vara ghostwritten, spökskrivna, skrivna av spöken var egentligen vad man talar om, därför att det är inte personerna som står med namnen som skrivit de här artiklarna. Och det är ju omöjligt naturligtvis för läkare att veta vilka artiklar är seriösa och riktiga och vilka är förtäckt reklam.
But are Swedish journalists really free to be critical? John Abramson, lecturer at the Harvard Medical School in Boston, feels that one should probably look more closely at that question.
When we look at journalism in the United States, and I assume it's the same in Sweden, the newspapers and the television, more so in the United States because we allow direct-to-consumer advertising, actually. And we, in the United States and New Zealand, are the only two countries that allow direct-to-consumer advertising. And my personal opinion is it's a very bad idea, and this is one reason why. Because now with the internet competing with newspapers and even with television, there's a lot of economic pressure on the older media to retain their advertisers so that they can be a profitable business. And the biggest amongst the biggest advertisers in the United States is the medical industry. That's where the money is. That's the growth industry. So what we have is a situation where the media is dependent on drug company advertising revenues, and it makes it very hard to attack the hand that feeds them.
Jag var ju ansvarig för bland annat ghostwriting en gång för många år sedan när jag inte visste ens vad det hette för någonting. När jag lärde mig för första gången att artiklar skrevs utav medical education-byråer, medicinska utbildningsbyråer, och sen sökte de efter en författare. Jag visste inte ens om att det fanns när jag kom in och började jobba och insåg plötsligt att här har vi alltså massor av artiklar som går ut som inte har skrivits utav de personer som står med sitt namn där.
I think it's critically important when a physician or when anybody is making strong, positive statements about any kind of medical therapeutics, that the journalist ask them what their financial ties are. Because very often we find out that people who are making claims about drugs being very good and not having risks have financial ties to the drug companies. Maybe they're funded to do research, maybe they're funded to speak to the other physicians, maybe they're paid to be on advisory boards for the drug companies, maybe they're paid to be thought leaders for the drug companies. And in the United States at least, the more academic prestige that a physician has, the higher the greater amount of money they can get from the drug companies to be advocating one position or another.
Vi vet att det är ungefär 1 av 20 ungdomar i 15, 16, 17 års ålder som har alltså depressionssjukdomen, inte bara är nedstämda. Det är 3 till 4 gånger fler flickor i och för sig i tonåren. Och av dessa så söker en 50-del. Och hälften av de som söker och får diagnos får behandling. Så det är bara 1 av 10 som får behandling alltså.
One of the things that the pharmaceutical companies have got very good at doing is to have 2 salesmen. The one you see that everybody's unhappy about. This is the person who's got the free pens. and who takes the doctors out for meals and organizes for trips to the Caribbean. Everybody sees that, and the useful thing about that salesperson for the pharmaceutical companies is that everybody says, it would all be okay if we didn't have people like that there, but at least we can see them, so we can see where the problem is. The other salesperson for the pharmaceutical companies is the doctor. And nobody sees this, least of all the doctor themselves. The pharmaceutical companies, when they visit the doctor, learn what he likes doing, learn the name of his wife and children and their birth dates and what he reads and what movies he's been to and what his attitudes are towards the treatment of illnesses and the use of pills, so that they can make sure they say exactly the right kind of things for him. What they're doing is understanding him better than he understands himself, so that when he then goes along to a meeting, they engineer it, that he hears the talks that are going to persuade him. He meets the experts that are going to persuade him, so that when he goes back, he is going to become the salesperson for the pill with his colleagues, with his patients, and with the public. And this is the salesperson who will deny any links to the pharmaceutical companies. He isn't employed by them. He will be indignant if you were to suggest to him that what he's become is a salesperson.
Depression är ju ofta en återkommande långtidssjukdom där man måste ha ett långtänk och se till att man blir helt bra och fortsätter att vara helt bra och slipper ett återfall. Och att man har ju skruvat fram tiden som behandlingslängden år från år. Så nu ska man ju säga att minst 1 års behandling har det blivit. Innan var det ju 6 till 9 månader, nu är det absolut minst 1 år. Och har man haft ett återfall så är det ju flerårig behandling.
But not everyone buys this marketing claim that you just extend the length of treatment. Göran Högberg is a child psychiatrist and chief physician in Stockholm.
Det europeiska läkemedelsverket, EMA, rekommenderar 6 månader. Alla studier är gjorda på kortare tid, cirka 3 månader. Så någonstans mellan 3 och 6 månader är en rimlig behandlingstid. Längre behandlingstider kan öka risken för kroniska verkningar, eftersom barn och ungdomars hjärna fortfarande växer, och det finns många djurförsök som visar att djur som i sin tillväxtperiod får SSRI-preparat får kroniska skador i sitt känsloliv som vuxna djur. Och det här är en risk som man måste ta på allvar.
Use of antidepressants in adolescence is derived from one manipulated study 329. There's a lot of publishing going on around it. It's a manipulated study, and it states that in fact the possible advantages of using an SSRI in adolescence does not outweigh the possible risks of using an SSRI. So as a doctor, I would be very reluctant to prescribe an antidepressant to a younger person.
But in the United States, they've gone even further. When George W. Bush was president, he approved the infamous screening program Teen Screen. It was aimed directly at school children, who, in school facilities, would fill out a simple questionnaire. That would provide the basis for a doctor to convince parents that their child needed medication. There are psychiatrists in Sweden who'd like to introduce similar screening programs.
But the real problem with Teen Screen is the false promise, because it's a very short step from screening kids and finding out which ones you call pre-mentally ill to giving them medication. Now, these medications are not without problems. And we talk about antidepressants, and we talk about the change in the way the kids interact and the way they see themselves, that their natural way of growing up and feeling is altered.
Det är ett stort mörkertal Och man behöver hitta bättre metoder för att identifiera och mer aktivt söka upp de här ungdomarna. För idag vet vi att från undersökningar, bland annat svenska undersökningar, att särskilt om det är långdragna depressionstillstånd så får de mycket mer problem som unga vuxna, eller ja, i 30-årsåldern, så långt har vi följt dem.
What we see is also a lot of disguised advertising that happens in a number of ways in Canada and in European countries, including in Sweden. It can include, for instance, a campaign on television that will talk about depression. Are you feeling sad? And if you're feeling sad, go to your doctor. There are treatments available. A company would run an advertising campaign like that for the public, often at the same time as they have a lot of sales representatives who are visiting doctors and talking about their new medicine for depression.
Den verklighet vi lever i är mycket mer manipulerad än vad vi kanske någonsin tror. Och jag fick egentligen inte insikt om det här vare sig under min läkarutbildning eller senare. Det var först själv när jag började arbeta på en del av de här stora företagen och såg hur man sydde ihop hela paketet, hur man la ut studier på det här sättet, hur man fick läkare att skriva under med sina namn, en massa andra grejer, gjorde ghostwriting, som jag insåg hur oerhört välplanerat alltihopa är och hur den verklighet vi ser omkring oss är tillverkad för att vi ska få en viss uppfattning om saker och ting. Och det är alltså, tror jag, mycket värre än vanliga människor någonsin kan tro.
I carried out research looking at what happens in the doctor's office, because if I looked at the spending on direct-to-consumer advertising in the United States, I could see that it must be a very profitable marketing technique. Just looking at the amount that's spent on this advertising.
För 30 år sedan så handlade det kanske om att man fick sin American Express-räkning avbetald, bokstavligen talat, där har täckts böcker tidigare. Idag så går det ju inte till på det sättet, men det handlar om att göra saker som är helt okej. Det vill säga stödja forskning, stödja resor, stödja utbildning, andra saker som inte skulle kunna ske därför att landstingen har inga pengar, men då har alltså läkemedelsbolagen pengarna som har tagit ut ofta ganska höga läkemedelspriser, speciellt i Sverige jämfört med övriga Europa. Och kan på så sätt ge tillbaka en del av de pengarna för att öka sin försäljning och knyta läkarkåren närmare till sig. Så Sverige är ett fantastiskt land för läkemedelsbolag, det är ingen tveksamhet om det.
In the early 1990s, companies were spending less than $100 million US per year advertising prescription medicines to the public. Now they're spending more than $5 billion per year. So if you look, it's an exponential curve. The spending just increased very rapidly.
US journalist Gary Schweitzer's career spans some 30 years. He has, among other things, set up healthnewsreview.org and is the author of the book covering medical research, published by the Association of Healthcare Journalists.
Not only do we not do a sufficient job of reporting on the potential side effects of SSRIs or any drugs, on this particular class of drugs, I don't think that we give enough attention to the very serious, important questions about whether we really have evidence that the physiological basis, the theory behind how these drugs are supposed to work, whether there really is any evidence that they do work. So they are made to address a chemical situation, to keep this simple, that we don't have overwhelming evidence is the underlying cause of the problem.
When the SSRIs came onto the market, what happened was that the pharmaceutical companies saw an opportunity here to resurrect this abandoned theory as a means of marketing it to people and convincing them that they needed to be on the drug. So the chemical imbalance theory still has a very persuasive message because it's extremely easy to understand. It tells you that health in a certain sense is a harmony, and that you have this disharmony in your brain, which is a lack of a certain chemical that the drug is going to supply. And people can simply think to themselves, well, it's not my fault. I have a problem with my body, or my brain in this case, which the drug is going to correct.
Healthy Skepticism is an organization of doctors and researchers that provides information about medical advancements to decision makers worldwide. Its Australian chairman Peter Mansfield believes that SSRIs pose an ongoing problem.
One of the important harms is that the SSRI antidepressants seem to work largely by decreasing the amount that people worry. They're concerned about things. They're concerned about their problems. Now, if they've been over-concerned, well, that could seem like an advantage. But there are problems that people are supposed to be concerned about. People are supposed to be concerned about looking after children if they have responsibilities for doing so. Teachers and parents and so forth. There's a big concern about whether it's safe for pilots to fly with lots of passengers if they're taking antidepressants, which may decrease their level of concern about whether they're doing a good job. Should doctors, whose job is to be concerned about the welfare of the patient, take antidepressants?
What a group of us have done recently, Barbara Mintzes from Canada and Lisa Hayes from Amsterdam, and I've edited a manual which is by a range of international authors and experts, which looks at and describes these different techniques of influence, how they work and how to recognise them. And this has been put together as a manual for teachers in medical schools to use with medical students to try and educate them before they're subject to these influences about the range of ways in which pharmaceutical companies will try to hold the pen with them as they write the prescription.
As you probably already realise, the situation in Sweden is serious, with a lack of qualified supervision over experts and pharmaceutical companies that are allowed to openly influence universities, researchers, doctors and the media. The most serious thing about this is that the rest of society accepts these practices. They apparently do not care. Recommendations and guidelines for doctors are the salesman's goals. The Swedish authorities choose to look away. Some doctors are taking a stand against corruption and involvement with the industry. They're fighting to ensure that your safety as a patient remains the prime focus. Maybe your doctor's one of them. Today, researchers around the world are discussing how to make it easier for patients to report on drug efficiency and side effects. But are Sweden's psychiatrists interested? We asked one of the country's most influential psychiatrists, Professor Emerita Marie Åsberg.
Jag tror inte det skulle spela någon större roll faktiskt om man förändrade rapporteringssystemet. Jag tror knappast det. Jag tror att också det att det här med biverkningar är... Det finns ju mycket myter om biverkningar och, som kanske inte är riktigt sanna. Man kan få höra ifrån, man går ut på nätet och tittar efter så kan man säkert se alla möjliga saker som inte drabbar en själv. Och jag vet inte, jag tror inte att en bättre rapportering till Läkemedelsverket skulle förändra den situationen, det tror jag faktiskt. Det är väl de här vanliga biverkningarna är man väl mindre benägen att rapportera. Vi vet alla till exempel att man ganska ofta får sexuella biverkningar av serotoninupptagshämmare. Men det ligger på något sätt, det är så pass vanligt så att man tycker att det finns ingen anledning att jag ska börja fylla i blanketter och skicka i det här till Läkemedelsverket om det är.
En grundläggande skillnad naturligtvis mellan Sverige och USA där jag bor nu, det är att här så finns det ett väldigt aktivt advokatväsende. Vilket betyder också att det finns stora pengar på att tjäna på att stämma läkemedelsbolag och läkare som gör fel eller som inte berättar allt. I Sverige så kan man ju få benet avsågat och knappt få någonting alls. Det finns alltså inte någon lönsamhet att för någon grupp, för någon yrkesverksam grupp i samhället att lyfta på förlåten och beskriva och berätta om de här sakerna. Men i USA så finns det alltså en motkraft. Hela the plaintiffs bar som det heter, alltså advokaterna som stämmer folk som gjort fel, som är intresserade av att lyfta fram de här frågorna.
Och det är också ett mycket legalt problem i USA att om du gör någonting som någon kan lasta dig för så kan du bli ruinerad resten av livet. Och det är vi ju inte rädda för här. Plus att den som skriver ut SSRI-medicin till unga i Sverige är nästan bara barnpsykiater. Vi är en ganska liten grupp och vi blir inte så påverkbara eftersom vi har detta som vårt huvudsakliga jobb. Och i USA ligger förskrivningen på allmänläkare och det är de som har skurit ner sin förskrivning, inte barnpsykiaterna.
I think what's being suggested is the expansion of psychiatry in order to identify illness earlier and prevent it. So that people who have relatively mild symptoms that may be indistinguishable from the normal aches and pains and existential sufferings of everyday life will be misidentified as having a label of mental disorder. And this will likely lead to excessive treatment. So what I'm suggesting is that psychiatry, which the DSM sets the boundary between normality and mental disorder. I'm suggesting that this boundary is probably over-inclusive already. We're probably diagnosing more people than really need our help at this point. And that expanding this boundary further is likely to lead to lots of unnecessary and potentially harmful treatment.
So think about that. Think about how widespread is the use of these drugs, the financial costs, the costs that we've been talking about of the side effects of these drugs, and we don't have sound evidence that the concept of how they would work is how they actually work. We don't have sound evidence that the chemical imbalance, as it were, that they're supposed to treat is something that even needs treating. Why aren't we telling that story every day in our newspapers? There are with any drugs, and we know there are with SSRIs. There are things maybe some people will stand to gain, but we don't know exactly how they gain, if they gain. But we do know there are things they stand to lose. All of it on the backs of an unproven physiological theory? And we wonder why journalism and science and medicine loses credibility in the public's eyes? This may be a very good example to start with.
Janet Curry works in Victoria in Western Canada as a researcher and consultant in health and medication use. She feels that the Swedes need to help each other.
I think people in Sweden need to learn what we in Canada have painfully learned and are still learning, that drug companies are like, they have their tentacles in every system. They have their tentacles in and they influence the guidelines of treatment, the definition of depression, the research, the clinical trials. They fund them. They determine all the types of people that go in the clinical trials. They determine the results of the trials. They decide what results are published and what are not. They control advertising. And in Sweden, I understand that there isn't advertising to the public, but there is advertising to doctors, and there is marketing to doctors, because doctors receive most of their information about drugs from drug companies.
Self-pity could be playing an important role in this situation. A trait of modern society is individuals' preoccupation with themselves and tendency to feel sorry for themselves. Salesmen exploit this by encouraging us to indulge in that little bit extra. Our self-pity leads us to put the blame on others and our environment. We feel like victims. The pharmaceutical industry takes full advantage of this, telling us that we need more information.
The worry for you in Sweden is that within the EU there's a strong push to allow pharmaceutical companies to communicate directly to patients in a way they're not allowed to at the moment. And it's being sold under the guise of information. Well, this is information. We're the experts in the drugs and we should be able to provide information to consumers to help make decisions.
There's a proposal now under discussion by the European Union for a shift in the legislation on pharmaceuticals for the whole European Union that would affect Sweden just like every other country. And direct-to-consumer advertising is very unpopular in Europe. So what has happened in the European Union is that there was a similar proposal to introduce advertising that was voted on by Parliament in 2002. The Parliament voted against it, nearly 500 parliamentarians against, for around 50 for, so very massively voted against. Now there's another proposal under discussion. Nobody is saying the A word, advertising, but it's supposedly a proposal to introduce patient information, but this is patient information by pharmaceutical companies about their medicines in media of some sort. So the proposal right now is for health-related print media. And what does that mean? It's very unclear. It could be a supplement in a newspaper that's on health, for instance. Nobody is saying the A word, advertising, but this legislation would involve a change to the European Directive article on pharmaceutical advertising. So it would be an amendment that would redefine advertising so that many things that are called advertising now would be called information. So they would not be subject to the restrictions that are currently in place, which is a prohibition of advertising prescription medicines. It's highly problematic, and what it would do in essence is allow the companies some leeway to advertise their medicines to the public in Sweden in a way that they're not allowed to now.
Make no mistake, it's not information, it's marketing, it's advertising, and the aim of it is to get more people to take more pills.
I think it's very important for European parliamentarians from Sweden to hear from the Swedish public and from health professionals and others that this is a bad idea.
We have direct-to-consumer advertising here, but even more influential than the direct-to-consumer advertising is the money that's spent in public relations, and I'm sure you have that in Sweden. So when a drug company advertises, you know what the story is. The drug company's paying for the ad, and they're having pretty flowers and nice music and gentle lighting, and they're trying to get you to connect to the product. But when it's public relations firms that have been hired to give a spin to a drug, then skillful public relations work doesn't leave a trail. So the public, the physicians, the government officials don't know that what they're taking as knowledge is really being brought to them because of its commercial value, not because of its social value. And this is a very serious problem.
När folk tänker på hur man marknadsför en produkt så tänker de vanligtvis på reklamfilm på bio, det är roligt, och annonser i tidningen, och det är bra så kostar tidningen mindre och så vidare. Va? Sanningen är den att den här typen av marknadsföring är inte så där oerhört effektiv. Reklam där mottagaren vet om att han får reklam är ju i sig inte speciellt trovärdig eftersom man talar i egen sak. Det som verkligen fungerar, det som verkligen är effektivt när man marknadsför en produkt, vilken produkt som helst, men speciellt läkemedel, det är när mottagaren får information som är positiv om produkten, men mottagaren vet inte om att det är reklam. Och vad är det för någonting då? Det är till exempel när man använder en PR-byrå som ser till att någon journalist kanske talar positivt om produkten på TV eller skriver en positiv artikel i Dagens Nyheter. Det är ju mycket mer effektivt än vad en annons kan vara. Och samma sak gäller om man kan till exempel få forskare, vetenskapsmän att göra en studie som ger positiva resultat. Och då frågar man kanske, men hur ska man kunna veta det i förväg? Jo, man kan förutsäga väldigt mycket om vilka resultat en studie kommer att få när man känner till en del basala data om produkten. Så man kan alltså välja vilken produkt man jämför sin egen produkt mot. Man ser till att man jämför dem med en produkt som man tror är sämre. Man kan titta på dosering, se till att ens egen produkt har en förhållandevis lite högre dosering så får man högre effekt. Det finns en massa saker man kan jobba med. Och det här är ju ingenting som journalister är utbildade i. En journalist som är på TV och berättar om en ny studie som har kommit och som är så jättefantastisk och som man ska berätta för Sveriges folk om. De vet kanske inte om att studien är helt skev.
The journalists have to step up to the plate. The journalists have to take responsibility and understand that there is going to be an inherent pro-industry bias in the information that's coming to them. And they've got to do the work to find out, they've got to find the sources who can provide balance to the information that they're going to become really the mouthpiece for.
One of the suggestions for DSM-V that I think is very unfortunate is to make it remarkably easy for someone during the bereavement period after losing a loved one to be diagnosed as having a major depressive disorder. If you have 2 weeks of sadness, suppose your loved one dies, 2 weeks later, you've been sad, you have less energy, less pleasure in life, you're having trouble sleeping, you don't feel like going to work, you would get a diagnosis of depression. Now, to me, this is problematic in several different ways. It will be medicalizing a normal mammalian experience. Part of being a mammal is to attach and to love the people in your life and to feel terrible when you lose them. This will be making that into an illness. It will often mean treating it with a pill that will be unnecessary and often perhaps harmful. It's taking away the dignity of the life lost, taking away the importance of the broken heart, and making it into a medical experience. So I've been very much against that. I think if someone has very severe symptoms, if they're suicidal, if they're delusional, the current system allows the diagnosis. But there's no reason for people who are having the average, expectable, terrible, poignant feelings of grief that happen after the loss of a loved one, for this to be misdiagnosed as major depressive disorder.
Göran Högberg is a child psychiatrist and chief physician in Stockholm. He and many others are upset about the recommendations issued by the National Board of Health in March 2010. They believe that those recommendations weren't built on scientific criteria.
Den expertgrupp som finns i Sverige och som har gjort underlaget för Socialstyrelsen, den består av ledande barnpsykiater. De säger att SSRI ska användas i första hand till deprimerade ungdomar, medelsvårt deprimerade. Och de hävdar då att effekten är god, vilket betyder 50-80% bättre än sockerpiller. Men det här stämmer inte. De följer inte vetenskapen som entydigt visar att effekten är svag, obetydlig. Ungefär 1 per 10 har bättre effekter än sockerpiller. Och sådana riktlinjer kommer ju att få en stor effekt för vården i hela Sverige och leda till att många ungdomar kommer att i första hand få SSRI-preparat istället för annan behandling som de kanske behöver, för kriser, för sorgreaktioner. Det är den behandlingen som bör utvecklas.
Tråkigt nog så är det väldigt lite offentlig finansierad verksamhet för att fortbilda läkare. Det är ju i stort sett läkemedelsindustrin som har det, men mycket av den utbildning som de gör är faktiskt bra. Men det borde vara organiserat på ett annat sätt. Men det är inte min sak att säga hur det ska organiseras. Jag tycker att den generationen som är i det här ska tala om hur de ska lösa det problemet. Jag är trots allt pensionär.
Ja, om läkemedelsbolagen håller i utbildningen så gäller det ju att de har ett upplägg i den utbildningen som attraherar på ett bredare sätt än att bara presentera sin egen medicin. Det här är ganska många medvetna om inom läkemedelsindustrin. Så de brukar försöka dra till sig lite föreläsare som är mer välkända och så. Och duktiga på sitt område som kan hålla lite mer allmänna översikter och inte bara en presentation av deras läkemedel. Men det är klart det kommer in och det får man väl se med de ögon man kan se. Och här är det bra att ha en forskarutbildning kan jag säga. För då kan man bättre kritiskt granska den information som kommer.
David Menkers, an associate professor of psychiatry, is surprised that Swedish doctors need to have been through postgraduate studies in order to receive further studies.
Well, here in Sweden, I'm reminded, just as at home, that doctors and the medical profession are facing a lot of choice about where they get their information from. And I think it's very important that we realize that the choices that we make in that respect reflect upon us as a profession and directly influence the quality of our clinical decisions and thus the care of our patients. As a consequence, I think that we can no longer be content to take information from industry or to rely on industry to provide our education. Even with skepticism, that's like saying, it's okay to sleep with the enemy as long as you practice safe sex. I think even in Sweden, that isn't on.
If you've got a court of law with a judge and a defendant and a prosecutor, and what happens if the prosecutor is actually the judge's cousin or the judge's spouse? Do we accept that as an okay way of doing things? Of course not. But in the medical world, we accept these kinds of intertwined relationships all the time.
It is up to governments in Sweden, in Canada, in the US, to regulate drug companies and to ensure there is no conflict of interest between the doctors who are prescribing and the researchers in the clinical trials. So there is a role for government. But until government undertakes that role, people in Sweden need to be aware and get the information, get balanced information for themselves so they can make the best decisions for themselves and their families.
If politicians are concerned about poor treatment outcomes for their constituents, if politicians are concerned about the high costs, the amount of taxpayers' money that is spent on drugs that provide little or no value and sometimes even do more harm than good, if politicians are concerned to improve health whilst reducing healthcare costs, then we're very keen to support them as best we can.
I think that we need to regard new diagnoses as fairly sacred things because of the abuse that can come from the overuse of the diagnosis and the overtreatment that results from it. Shouldn't be something that a small panel of experts decides upon. Shouldn't be something that the American Psychiatric Association decides upon. I think there should be a 4-tier system for approval of new diagnoses. It would start with a wiki approach at the simplest first level, go to expert consensus editors. The third level would be public policy and health economics. And then at the end of the day, you'd have to have some sort of Supreme Court that would decide which things got in. But it should be a thoughtful, a regulatory process, one that realizes the risks, the great risks, as well as the sometime benefits of new diagnoses. Thank you very much.
Students celebrating their graduation day in central Stockholm 2010. That same year, these young adults were fooled through media reports into believing in a totally incorrect article in a medical journal which claimed that SSRIs were reducing the number of suicides. The article was written by, among others, Göran Isaksson. It took 2 years before the scandal was discovered and the article erased by the journal in March 2012, without a word being uttered by the Swedish media. Why were these Swedes not told about the falseness of the article's findings?
People who consume media also consume this idea that drugs are harmless, that they are entirely safe, when in fact that's very far from the truth. because we examine drug treatments in clinical trials, we collect a lot of data, we analyze that data, and we can tell you how many people in the clinical trials have been injured. Part of the problem, though, and this is what we've seen over the last few years, is that if the company that's manufacturing the drug, if they decide not to publish that trial, they don't have to.
If you live near a source of pollution here in Sweden, and you're concerned about the risks to you or your family, you're able to find out because you've got laws about freedom of information. But in fact, the greatest source of possible chemical pollution on Earth is in medical practice, where we put more chemicals into the human body than happens at any other point during your life. The problem is that you're not able to find out what the risks of these chemicals might be. There is no freedom of information. The data and the documents are withheld from you and your family and any experts who may be concerned on your behalf. I'm a doctor who wants to practice medicine and to do so safely. But without this information, I simply can't do it. As it turns out, I have probably seen more of the hidden documents and the hidden data than anyone else in Europe. I've seen more often than the regulators have seen. And I know that the material is being withheld from your experts, from your doctor, and from you. Material that is vital to your safety and the safety of anyone in your family or your friends who may be on either the antidepressants or on any other drug that you happen to be on.